First of all, Elizabeth Stride was the third victim of Jack the Ripper. She was born in 1843 in Sweden and migrated to the UK, and she ended up in the streets of Whitechapel. She came to look for better life, but unfortunately she became homeless and then ended up in prostitution in Whitechapel. She had a difficult life, and she was married by a man called John Stride. Because of drunkenness and domestic issues, they couldn't continue living, so she struggled looking for work. She just wasn't lucky, and she ended up in the street. She relied mostly on prostitution because of the problems. But she was vibrant and she had a good personality, but she found herself in a dire circumstance. She was murdered on 30th September 1888, and on the night of her death, she was seen alive around 12:30 a.m. talking to someone in Barner Street. But later she was seen murdered by John Evans, a man who had been walking, just going to work or something. Her throat had been cut, and she did not have further mutilations. This lack of additional mutilations made people think that the killer may have been interrupted during the act and run away. It was assumed that probably the killer had been interrupted. That's why he did not do the other cuts that he did to the other women. So that interruption made him run away because someone came and disturbed him. There was a man who came and lit a torch, a match or a torch, to check whether what was on the way, because he was walking with his I think it is his horse home, and on the way the horse stopped, and he wanted to find out why the horse had stopped. So he lit a match, checked on the ground, and he thought he saw a body, but he dismissed it because it was dark in the night and he had just lit a match. So he decided to go home, and then because he thought, let me check on my wife, maybe she could be the one who probably got drunk and was on the way home. Let me check on her in the pub, because they used to run a pub, but the wife was right there. So he went back, and I think that's when he found the body, and he called the police. We go now to Catherine Endowes. Catherine Endowes was a lady with turbulent life. She had been married to Endowes, but she just couldn't keep the marriage because of drinking. She was known for her resilience, and she was known to be a lively character, but her struggles with alcohol significantly impacted her life. She ended up in the streets. She was struggling. She couldn't cope, and she ended up becoming a prostitute because she was looking for jobs, but she couldn't find because of alcohol and bad relationships. On this night, she was murdered the same night as Stride. She was drinking on a local pub, and she was seen around 1:30 a.m. and then left the pub, and then later found in Mitra Square at around 1:45 a.m., where police constable called Edward Watkins found her. Her throat had been cut, her abdomen had been brutally mutilated with her organs removed and incisions made on her face. The killer had taken her kidney, and part of her uterus indicated that he had some anatomical knowledge, causing panic around the area and in East End. We go to the last victim, Mary Jane Kelly. Mary Jane Kelly had a more stable background compared to the other victims. She was known to have lived a relatively comfortable life in Ireland before she moved to London. However, her life in London was marked by hardship, and she eventually ended up in lodging houses, struggling to survive, and poverty struck her. She was murdered in her own room, which was very significant because it was far away from other murders, and because other murders occurred in the streets, hers occurred in her own room. This may have made the killer more confident to deal with the crime the way he wanted, because it was it was brutal. He had no fear, and he had cut her, and he had removed everything and put everything everywhere in the room. It was really bad. These murders occurred against the backdrop of poverty in East End, and many women had resorted to prostitution due to lack of opportunities, and everything was sensationalized and public fascination. The investigation into the murders was extensive, but ultimately unsuccessful. Numerous suspects were named, but lack of forensic. The police received thousands of letters, including the Reaper himself, leading to speculation that the Reaper wanted to be seen. For example, the poverty and economic struggles could have been limited employment opportunities for women, and many women had limited access to education and jobs, and that's why they ended up looking for extra income, because most of the work was for men. The few available options often included domestic service, factory work, or low-paying jobs in sweatshops. Prostitution became a means of survival for many due to the lack of better opportunities. Also, women who did work often earned significantly less than men for the same jobs. This created financial dependency on male relatives or partners. So you had to go to you have to have partners or men, friends who are working, so that they can help you to cope with life, because there were not many jobs for women. And if there were jobs, those who could get jobs, they were paid minimum wages, which was not enough. Women's experiences varied greatly depending on their social class. So middle and upper class women were often confined to domestic roles and were expected to adhere to strict social norms, while working class women faced harsher realities and had to work outside the home. So that was the social class hierarchies where women's experiences were different. We've seen that. So and also limited rights. So lower class women, especially those in poverty, faced discrimination and stigma, which limited their access to services and support. Limited rights for lower class women, especially those in poverty, discrimination and stigma, which limited their access to services and support, because you could not afford to buy things that were bought by working class. We've seen the domestic ideals that were expected of poor people, and limited ambitions and independence. We've seen that. Lack of autonomy. Married women were often seen as property of their husbands, with limited rights to their own earnings or property. The legal system favored men, making it difficult for women to seek divorce or maintain custody of children. Really, really sad, for women who are living like that. I'm glad that things have improved, and nowadays, people are living independently. You can choose how you want to live your life. If those days in 1888 was so bad for women, then you can see where it all started. Women wanted rights. Women wanted independence. Many women lived in overcrowded places. Can you imagine 24 people living in one room? Anyone coming in with an illness, you definitely get it. So this country has really come from far, very far, in a way that what we see today is way much developed than 1888. But I wouldn't be surprised that some countries are still living like this. I'm saying this because where I come from in Africa, there is still poverty. But we can see the journey where it all started, poor living condition. And, I can imagine there were diseases such as tuberculosis and all kinds of sicknesses that were untreatable because they had not found medication that could take care of that. Now, other countries in Africa or in other parts of the world living in poverty, where the children cannot even afford to go to school. How can I purify water for drinking? This is all education, and if you can educate your children at home, why not? If you can send them to school, why not? Even the Bible says that my children perish for lack of knowledge. Knowledge is power. Yeah. Don't perish for lack of knowledge. Perish because you did not know where to find knowledge. But if you know where to find knowledge, do not perish. prostitution in the streets. Anytime, I'm not saying it will happen, but it can happen. You could be, you could even get diseases out there, you know. What kind of life? How did you end up in the street? Was it lack of money? Was it lack of job? Because in this country, there are jobs out there. And if you're poor, you can go to the government and the government will give you some cash. It's not that bad in England. It can give you cash, and if it's not enough, you find a job. So I am going to close this chapter by saying that for me, I pay respect to those women who lost their lives, but I'm not condoning prostitution as a way of living at all. I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying people should do prostitution. In fact, don't do it. Go and look for a job. Look for a job and be proud of what you're doing. You know, I know that this country has allowed it, but for you as a person, it's not a good thing. Don't do it. Look for a job. Find a husband, get married, and the men who are doing prostitution also, you know, find something to do and get married, or, you know, do something for your life. Don't do prostitution, because I feel so sorry for these ladies who got murdered. Just around where I lived is such a enormous story. I can just attempt to do some, but I know there's much more in London that many of you do not know. So join me next time. Until then, bye-bye. Take care. Bye.